Thank you everyone for joining. My apologies for the confusion on timings. I know it was advertised as 8 or 8:30, so thank you if you hung around online waiting for this to start. We're really pleased to have you here for our session on what is food systems research. It's a big question, and we are going to give some examples of what we've done in terms of food systems research with examples from Benin, and I have a great panel of colleagues here. So let me see if can the slides go up? Great. So, I mean, we know that hundreds of proposals and papers now apply food systems methods, right? But it's rarely defined what that is. And more rarely still does that work really take a sort of end-to-end approach from farm or even before the farm all the way through to fork or what people eat. So the idea of this session is that it's going to explain conceptual and methodological approaches for food systems research, and then present findings from a flagship end-to-end study called SafeVeg in West Africa, which has generated evidence on vegetable food systems for healthy diets. So we're really taking a focus on vegetables today. My name's Jodie Harrison. I work at the World Vegetable Centre, and many of my colleagues here also work for the centre, although we have collaborators as well on this project, so they will introduce themselves as they come up. So we have lots of speakers today who will be telling you, focusing largely on the methods they've used to research food systems. We will also be presenting some results from each of the studies, but the methods is really going to be the focus. And then we'll open for a discussion. You can ask the presenters about their work, but also we can have a discussion about what is food systems research. We're trying to take this agenda of food systems research forward together. So as I said, this entire panel draws largely on studies under a project called SafeVeg, which is a food systems research and action project in Benin, Mali, and Burkina Faso. Today, just for coherence, I've asked the speakers to focus on Benin because we don't have time to do everything and just to keep things streamlined. So I'm going to start with a very brief overview of what we think an end-to-end approach might be, or what we think food systems research might be. I'm sure you're all in this room familiar with the HLP Food Systems Framework or versions of it. So obviously it maps conceptual aspects of a food system from the broad sort of biophysical, political, economic and social drivers of food systems through things like food supply chains, food environments, consumer behavior, and through to diets and other health and social and economic and environmental outcomes that we're all interested in. So one way to look at food systems research is as multiple studies on parts of the system and then brought together to say something about the whole thing, about the whole system. So it may be focused on a certain context or geography or time or population to bring this together conceptually. And this is the approach that the SafeVeg project has taken. And today you're going to hear about some of those studies. So if that'll work, the ones in red there. So this kind of approach enables a sort of narrative synthesis, a descriptive assessment of a system. And maybe it helps us to understand, where we can intervene at key points to remove some barriers or to achieve better food system outcomes. This kind of approach can help us to look at really disparate parts of a very complex system using a range of methods that are most appropriate to that topic. So it has some utility using this approach. But what it can't do using this kind of approach, obviously, is to make strong causal claims about exactly what a system is, why a system is generating the outcomes that it is. So this is the approach we've taken with SafeVeg. At the other end of the sort of spectrum of methods that try to understand entire complex systems as a whole could be things like qualitative ethnographic approaches that engage really deeply with a context to understand the system from the perspective of the people living within it. That's another way to understand an entire complex system. Or something like large-scale modeling exercises that combine as many variables as possible into a model to understand maybe how one thing causes another. So there are lots of different ways of looking at complex systems, and we're going to hear more about the range of methods in the final presentation of this session by Rose in a moment. But whichever approach we take, obviously there are sort of pros and cons. So, we can look at parts of the system and we can look at those multiple aspects and use multiple methods, but of course it can't look at causality and a bit less of the complexity. Or we can try and look at the whole system in kind of one analysis, which can look better at interactions and causality, but can only look at aspects that are amenable to your chosen method, that you don't get that diverse kind of methodological possibility. So now we're going to hear in a bit more depth about some of the methods that can be used to look at parts of the system. And then we're going to hear from Rose talking more about ways that other researchers have used to look at the whole system. And then I hope we can have a discussion after that. So we're going to go through each of the very brief presentations, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A at the end. So welcome, first of all, Ferdinand. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jody, and warm greetings to the audience. Thank you for having us. The research I'm going to be presenting right now is is conducted under the umbrella of the the Safe Veg project, and aimed to elucidate how and to what extent social context and social institutions influence the vegetable demand in West Africa. So to begin, I would say the Safe Veg project operates through a three-dimensional approach. That is the push, pull, and policy framework. And when we look into the push dimension, the pull dimension, which is concerned with creating the demand for vegetable in Africa, we were interested in understanding the drivers of vegetables. The drivers like the social context, and how and to what extent social context influenced vegetable demand. So we were interested in understanding the drivers of food choice, and the food eating behavior. So this was to be able to I'm sorry, I'm a little bit stressed, so let me just calm down. Okay.
Stay back from the mic.
Okay, I'm sorry. So I was saying we were just interested in understanding the drivers of the food choices and eating behavior, and this was to be able to inform the effective interventions that will likely increase the food vegetable demand in West Africa. So we found out in the literature of the preliminary research that actually beyond the complexity of drivers that determine or influence the food system, as you can see in the figure 1, the adoption of technologies for instance, vegetable, new varieties of vegetable and nutrient-rich vegetables is strongly determined by how the social context is taken into account. So from that, for instance, when we look at in a community, some will tell you that actually we don't eat vegetables because the vegetables are grass and they are meant for the goat and for humans too. So in that context, if the World Vegetable Center struggle to make vegetable available and accessible for the population, they will never adopt it, they will never eat it, you know. So this is why we were interested in then understanding or conducting a research on how social institutions like as shown in this slide, how social institutions like culture, media, religion, family, and economic status interact together to shape vegetable demand. So I'm sorry, I have to go back a bit. So the question we posed to ourselves was, what are the social institutions that influence the vegetables? What are those? What are the influence of those institutions? What vegetables they actually influence in terms of demand, and then how they are pattern in terms of gender. So to be able to carry out this research and respond to our research questions, we conducted a systematic literature review following the preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analysis, so-called PRISMA, because PRISMA is, promotes transparency and reproducibility of literature review. So first we went for the conceptualization of the protocol, where we take it based on the theoretical framework that I will present in soon. And then we we identify the literature based on two search engines, including Scopus and Web of Science. And after the literature identification, we went for the screening of the studies. And for the screening, we based on a set of criteria, a set of eligibility criteria that we followed, including studies that are peer-reviewed exclusively, studies that have been written in English, and the studies that have documented or addressed vegetable demand, studies that have documented the institutional drivers of vegetable demand, you know. Then we went for the quality check of the screening process, because the screening process was carried out by 2 independent researchers. So next we extracted the data, and I have to mention that the screening, quality check and extraction of the data were facilitated by a platform so-called SysRev, you know. So coming back to the so coming back to the theoretical framework, we adopted the socio-cognitive theory, the combined socio-cognitive theory and the socio-ecological model developed by Story 2002. And we were able to look at the influence of those drivers, as well as the interactions of those drivers across levels of influence. So this is just an overview of the data collection and data analysis. But one thing to point out here is that we framed social institutions as a set of organized patterns of beliefs and behaviors, you know, shared by members of a given community, and either together or individually shape the demand for vegetables. So coming back to the findings, I would say overall, we found that, our study helped us confirm that actually, when looking at an effective strategy, scaling up strategies for vegetable promotion in West Africa, these require a careful consideration, a careful articulation of social institution embeddedness. For instance, the right-sided figure or graph shows that cultural norms at the macrosystem level and personal perceptions and belief at the intrapersonal levels were the main drivers that we found out as enabling or constraining vegetable demand in West Africa. And when the left side of the slide shows that the influence of these institutions strongly depends on the types of vegetables. For instance, we found that traditional African vegetables were mostly influenced by the cultural norms, as compared to conventional vegetables. So I will stop here and give room for my colleagues to present their work too. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ferdinand. That was really, the social institutions aspect of vegetables is incredibly interesting. So let's move on now and welcome Nestor. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Jody. Thanks you all for being here. I'm Nestor Alopai from the National University of Agriculture in Benin. And, we carry the research on understanding food policies and the impact on food system. Then, as background, as you know, the policy decision has great influence on food system and also mostly on making available vegetables accessible, desirable, and affordable over time, and also for different people, and therefore shape the enabling environment. Enabling environment for healthy diets. The aim of our study is to understand the policy environment, the policies that are available, and how those policies have been shaped by the decision makers, and what are the key actors involved in policy design and implementation in Benin, and to see also the various norms, the narratives, and the interests across the food system, and how the let's say the key stakeholders perceive the impact of these policies. We were inspired by the HLPE framework that Judy has already talked about, and also by the Kingdom 1998 multiple stream framework. For the beginning of the study, we designed 3 key questions that orient all the steps we followed to carry out the research. As methods, we followed 3 main steps. We did a policy document review to know which kind of policies are available and are targeting food environment, food system in general, and also what they forecast as activities to impact greatly food system, and also till to the amount dedicated to the food system environment improving. And also the second step was based on the policy network mapping. So we did the net map of the stakeholders, and this consisted in gathering some stakeholders and to try to know which stakeholders are involved. And in this, according to this, we tried to categorize, to do a typology of the stakeholders. We separate we try to understand which stakeholders are linked to the government, or the government institution, and the stakeholders coming from the civil societies, the stakeholders coming from the farmers organization, and also the stakeholders coming from the academic institution, who are very involved, strongly involved in the policy design targeting food system in the country. So through this step also, we try to understand what are the connections, the interaction of these stakeholders, and as connection, as regulation, as funding, as collaboration, as let's say advocacy. So we try to separate the stakeholders who are funding the food system in the country, and who are collaborating, how they collaborate between them, and also which stakeholders are involved in advocacy to improve food environment policies. And then we move to the, after this, we try to sample some stakeholders, key stakeholders, with the support of the stakeholders that attended the NetMap session. And then we we selected about 25 stakeholders to do some interviews. And then the interviews guy was related mostly to the issues about agriculture, food, and diets in the country, how they perceive, and how the policies intend to impact this aspect, and also what they think as priorities that the policies must target to improve food environment, as well as the policies gaps. What are the policies available as they perceive, and what are the gaps they think we need to fill out in terms of policy to improve food system. So for the data analysis, we use the Caucus software, which is a qualitative data analysis software, and then we extract from the interviews as well as policy with some key, let's say, key aspects related to each codes. So as shown at the left, we see what are the perception about the solution for producing, for instance, and consuming vegetables, the priorities as well, the key issues, the impact of COVID-19, and the regulations that are in place, and so on. So after this, the key findings, we found that we collected many policies that are targeting the food system in general, but there are less policies specific targeting vegetable production and consumption in the country. And then we read that there is a less attention given to food and nutrition quality. So the government is mostly targeting how to make food available, not less attention is given to the quality of foods. So there are not many policies targeting food quality in the country. And for all the actors, the climate change effects are key challenges for all the food and nutrition sector in Benin. Thanks.
Nesta, thank you. And yeah, really important to understand the policy environment for food systems, of course. Okay, so we're going to move on now and welcome Lise.
Thank you, Judy. Okay, my name is Amavilis Agbenglo. I'm a research assistant at the World Vegetable Center, specifically on seed system. And the seed producers capacity assessment I'm going to present to you was conducted under SAVET project, specifically under the work package 4. The objective of this work package was to increase the use of improved varieties by farmers, vegetable varieties by farmers. And as you all know, there is a clear need to promote micronutrient-rich food in our local food system, and specifically due to the high prevalence of malnutrition in our countries. And you know that vegetables are well placed to contribute to this. Then the project is working on the supply side to create new varieties and also strengthen the seed system in order to increase the access of farmers to this. And you know that as a result of research, breeders develop new technologies, mainly varieties, but how farmers can have access to this technology? There are key actors between breeders and farmers who play an important role to allow farmers to have access to these improved varieties. There are seed producers, and in the approach of the projects, the seed producers are key actors to scale the new varieties breeders have developed. This is why it is important for us to know whether the vegetable seed supply chain functions in Benin and how the current capacity of local seed producers meet the seed demand in terms of quality seed. The objective of the studies were to characterize the different types of vegetable seed producers and also to map the distribution of these different seed producers across the country, and also evaluate the technical capacity based on the different function within well-developed seed companies. I'm talking about production, processing, marketing, and also research and development aspect. We use semi-structured questionnaire we developed around these three aspects and we just field survey, and we identify 37 seed producers based on their activity in seed production and also marketing, and based on the registration in the national seed producers list. The main inclusion criteria we use is in-country seed production and distribution. Several data were collected and are related to the type of seed producers, individual seed producers, companies, cooperative or public seed producers, and also the seed chain activities they covered, breeding, seed multiplication, marketing, distribution, and so on. We also collected data on seed production schemes. Is it in home production or contract growing seed production with other seed producers? We also identify the diversity on the variety crop portfolio, and also human resources, production, processing, and storage capacity, and also distribution channel, quantity of production and sales, as well as constraints faced in the different activity along the seed value chain. We use descriptive statistics to analyze the data, and also use divergence software to map the distribution of these seed producers across the country. As key finding, we found that individual seed growers are most present in Benin. About 70% are individual seed producers, followed by cooperatives and seed companies. And they were unequally distributed across the country, with a concentration in the southern part and northern part of the country. Then we can show that in this figure, a large part of the country still to be covered by seed producers and distributors. The second feeding is about the seed activity covered by different seed producers in the seed chain. And we found that only production and most of the seed producers are involved in seed production and distribution. But however, we observe that for individual seed producers, they face many difficulties to sell their seed in comparison to companies and cooperatives that have high capacity in terms of marketing and distribution. And at the end, we observe that low interest of seed producers in breeding activities, and that they're still dependent to source their basic seed. They're still dependent to national research institutes and varieties that are registered in the catalog. And currently, they have a few varieties, vegetable varieties, released in the national catalog, and they were old and not preferred by farmers. I think that I'm at the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Lise. And seed systems were a part of food systems that I hadn't really thought about before I joined World Veg, a really fundamental part of the system. So great to hear about that. So let's move on to thinking about food environments. Welcome, Christelle.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity. Before I start my presentation, I just want to recall something, one quote from Hippocrates, who said that let food be the medicine and medicine be the food. I think that when we take the environment in which we are, according to COVID pandemics, according to disease on like stunting, obesity, I think that is really, really, really important to attain and to maintain also a good nutritional status. So, but according to Hereford and all 2020, price and affordability are key barriers to accessing sufficient, safe, nutritious food to meet dietary needs. So also from Hereford and 2022, in low countries, people spend an average of 52% of expenditure on food. When I read it, I say, wow, this is fantastic. But the things that, according to FAO 2022, 3 billion citizens cannot afford a healthy diet. And also, when we get down, we go to the Western Africa, we notice that 79.2% of the population in Western Africa cannot also afford these costs. So our interest at WorldVeg is to know what is the situation of cost, of affordability, of cost recommended diet in Benin. So really we want to answer the question about the minimum cost that meet the nutrient needs of a typical house in Benin. We also want to know the cost share of vegetable compared to cost of other food groups. The third question is to know if this diet is affordable for Benin people. But here I don't want to highlight this third type of for this third question. Oh, sorry. I'm in my sorry. I'm so sorry. Yeah. Okay. So the methodology that we use is like that. First of all, we use secondary data. We use secondary data from World Food Program platform, and we try to identify 3 years: 2019, 2020, and the 2020, yes, and the 2021. So when we go through this database, we do 2 steps of cleaning. The first step of cleaning is to identify the year that is really relevant for our study. So we just take into account the year in which we have all months. That will allow us to see the trend of cost during the year. The second things, at the second level, so at this level, we identify the year 2020 first. The second is when we take the year 2020, we try to select the 2 big markets according to each small administrative section, each small administrative subdivision in which we have the most of food item and the most food groups. And after that, we delete what we have to, we drop what we have to delete. I mean, missing unit, missing food item, missing food price. So when we have, as you can see, we have our database cleaned. We used the tool developed by Hereford and team. And when we want to use this tool, we adapt to our context in Benin. What I mean, we use as food guideline, the Benin food guideline first. And also when we want to identify the food composition table, we use the West African food composition table because there are some local food which are very difficult to find in the food composition table given to the team. So after that, when we run the tool, when we run the calculation, we found that yes, side one, not yes, sorry. So we found our output. Sorry. So the key finding coming from this output is that we notice that when we want to see the trend of the cost in the year, The cost is higher in April, July, August, and December. Secondly, we noticed that the level of cost of one food group is function of the areas. That means that if I take, for instance, vegetables, is more costly in center than others region, like fruit and others. The third key finding that we have is that meeting vegetable requirement is most costly. So this result is very important because that can influence food security and nutrition policy and programs and contribute also to advocacy. Thank you.
Fantastic, Christelle, thank you. Yeah, we know, of course, that the cost and affordability of a diet is fundamental, and it's really nice to see that being analysed for Benin alongside all of the other global work that's going on. So great, so moving from food environments now to people's lived experience of those environments. So welcome, Rauda.
Thank you, Jody. Many thanks to the audience for coming and for your interest. I'm Rauda Bouraima. I'm a PhD student from the University of Abomey-Calavi in Benin and the World Vegetable Center. I represent my work on live experience of different people with their food environment. And this work has to be done in Benin, in 3 countries of West African 3 countries, like Benin, Burkina Faso, and Mali. But we already started from Benin, as this is our home country. And as you all already know, using this framework from Christopher Turner, eating habit and food choices decisions can change in response to social conditions like physical, economic, and also individual factors that can interact together to determine people's perception and also their lived experience about the food environment. So this qualitative study is designed with the aim to explore food environment challenges faced by the most marginalized group and their food choice with fruit and vegetable to provide more information to our current understanding of the food system. Okay. Okay, so this work have a very clear equity focus, as those individuals that have great risk of social exclusion and marginalization also count, and then the sampling is a very key stage. So we decide to work with to use a participatory based approach to work with local stakeholders as key informants in order to define which aspect or what kind of marginalization criteria we have to work with. We have a focus on region in Benin, the region that have a very big evidence of food and nutrition issues, and we use as key informant local stakeholders, local actors, ministry, and also mayor to help us that are very aware of social issues in the area in order to help us define which individual or which marginalized group we have to work with. And we will have to use a purposive sampling with a possibility to use snowball sampling also for this study. Yes, so this study used interviews, and our interview guides have very few questions with the aim to open the discussion, asking mainly what is those people's perception about what they eat, why they eat so, what they know about eating nutritious food. That will help us to gain particular insight of their behavior relevant to eating nutritious food. And we will use a social mapping to draw and describe their food environment with them. We will use this approach to design with those people what is their own food environment. And we will also use photo voice to document drivers or barriers relevant to their food consumption and their food acquisition. And this study started a year ago with a literature review, and which helped us use some secondary data to define our conceptual framework about marginalization and social exclusion. So then we come up with 5 big or major aspects of marginalization that define a marginalized one in Benin. And now we can say that a marginalized people is someone who live with a limited or restricted access to social or economic or also political lives in his area, and the people who have a very poor capacity to ensure good standards of living for his member, or it's also a people who so an individual who live with an unfair social status due to the lack of income or other factors. And this can also be a people, like an individual who live in an area with a lack of opportunities and interests, like, for example, a lack of NGO presence in his environment, in his area. And also a marginalized people is someone who experiences social issues and face indignity in his life. And we use these four major aspects from the second data that we get from literature review to contextualize with our local, to compare with our local condition in Benin. And then we start a sampling field work on 8 major regions in Benin, like Donga and Atakora, Mono and Kufo region, Atlantic and Littoral regions, and also Zoo and Kolin regions. In Donga and Atakora region, we found that the access to education for children, especially for girls, is a very big issue there, because for them, an educated woman is not very good for marriage. She's not very, she will not be very good to live in her husband's house, because she will like, she will be like, so how can I say? Okay, and also, and access to land for women and widow is very, very key point, because it's very difficult to get for a woman, or especially a widow, to have an access to land. And we also notice some gender-based violence in those areas, in Donga and Atakora region. In Mono and Kufo, we also identify some geography disparities and ethnicity that is a big issue in those areas. And also your marital status determine if you are considered in this society or not, if you are polygamous or if you are monogamous. That is a criteria of classification there. And also the elderly and disabled people have specific disadvantage condition in this area. In Atlantic and Littoral, we also noticed the geography disparity, as people live very far from the center and they cannot benefit from opportunity. And there is also NGOs absence. NGOs are not everywhere because they don't have funding to help everybody. And we also notice gender-based violence in this area, and elderly and disabled people deserve a very bad condition of living. In Zoo and Colin, we also notice those geography disparities and the access to education for children. That is very difficult and a very big issue, especially for girls. Ethnicity also, who is a very big point, and the land ownership by women, especially by widow. When your husband died, you have to leave the home and to go to live on your own. And also we notice the gender-based violence, which is in this area, and added to children that have their parents with HIV disease. They are stigmatized, and also often that deserve a very bad condition. So for now, this is our key finding for our students, and we are still on our work on our field work is still ongoing, and we have more results very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Raudas. I think this is going to be really important work in understanding how we conceptualize marginalization at a local level and not just from the literature. So yeah, watch this space for that work. So we've been through social institutions, policy drivers, seed systems, food environments, food experience. You've seen how in the Safe Veg project we're conceptualizing studies that go through the food system. We have one more presentation. This one's going to be online, our online participant. And this is going to be describing some other methods that we might choose to use in understanding complex food systems. So welcome, Rose.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining this early on the last day of the conference. So my name is Rose Verstraeten, and I work for the European Commission's Joint Research Centre, and I'm based in Italy. And as Jody mentioned, I'll be talking a bit about the collaboration amongst different institutes that have looked at this mapping exercise. Next slide, please. So to inform food systems policies and programs, a clear set of methods options is essential. And these methods can help assess various aspects within a food system, like, for example, analyzing interactions between components of the food system or assessing future scenarios, and this across different contexts. The popularity of the food system concept has led to the use of, like Jody mentioned in the beginning, a diverse approaches and methods, but currently there's no comprehensive synthesis of methodological options for assessing food systems or parts thereof. So to bridge this gap, we conducted a review to explore existing methods used to assess complex methods. Complex food systems. Next slide, please. So the goal of this review was to assess and synthesize peer-reviewed evidence on complex methods to assess food systems. We therefore applied a systematic mapping review approach and followed the Cochrane guidance and PRISMA statement, which Ferdinand already briefly touched upon in the beginning. So I'm not going into detail here, but the search terms were developed to capture evidence on the universe of methods that are used and applied to understand these complex food systems. And then our data coding taxonomies, which refers to our own categorization or classification of concepts, as well as synthesis, were developed to inform then in the end the evidence gap map, which I will show a bit more in detail in a minute. To be clear, no quality appraisal of publications was taken. So what you see here in this slide is that our PRISMA flowchart, the work started in April last year, and out of the 9,684 papers we screened, we're in the process of synthesizing 124 papers from different fields and sectors. Next slide, please. So data from each of these papers were coded according to the main categories that you can see here. So the first one, the HLP framework that Jody introduced to you already, and the methods categories that we used was based on the research onion, which was translated, for example, into the strategy. So whether it was a qualitative or a quantitative approach taken, the methodology itself, the data collection and analysis. And then I give some examples of our own taxonomies. So for example, the food system level, so whether the method was applied at national, global, regional, subnational level, the theme like sustainability, climate change, trade, whatever like we've heard this week, or the purpose. So was the purpose to describe the system, the food system, or to assess future scenarios, allowing us to then compare and contrast these methods along the different food system dimensions. Next slide, please. So here are some key findings for each of these main coding categories, starting with the HLP framework. So the figure on the left-hand side shows that application of methods are quite well distributed across the different domains from the HLP framework, although most of the methods were applied to a food supply chain. But when we take a closer look, only a quarter of the studies focuses on all categories in the food system, as we defined it, as you saw in our coding in the previous slide, right? So whereas the remainder limits itself to kind of the core categories of this food system, so including supply chain, food environments, and consumer behavior. On the right-hand side, what you see there is that most methods are applied to environmental and economic outcomes, followed closely by food security, but that nutrition and social equity were much less studied with these methods. Next slide, please. So for the methods, I'll focus on two key categories of the research onion. So I think what is important to mention or highlight here is that both qualitative and quantitative approaches have been used almost equally to assess parts of the food systems. And then when we look at the methodologies actually applied, which you can see on the right-hand side, we see that any type of framework, method, or model development and a case example, which we defined as applying that framework or method or model, they stand out, as well as input-output oriented approaches, which include, for example, life cycle assessments and index indicator metrics development. When examining that a bit closer, the studies that assessed all categories of the food system that we defined earlier versus those that only look at those core categories and how the methodologies change across these two, we see that index indicators, metrics, and case examples and framework development, they emerge as sort of predominant methods for assessing across all food system categories, as well as for the three core. But within the three core, the input-output oriented approaches, they become much more significant. So here's the key findings from our synthesis of data using our own taxonomy. So a lot of graphs, I'm not expecting, I don't know how big the screen is, but I'm not expecting you to read, just walking you through. Methods were predominantly used to assess sustainability, transformation, resilience, natural resources, and environmental change in the food system. And the most common applications of methods were to describe the food system, either identify entry points for food system change, or analyze the performance of the food system or its components. And then the majority of methods were applied at national level, examining relationships between food systems or elements. And actually, fruit and vegetables was one of the commodities that received the most attention by these methods. So what you'll see here is that end result I was talking about in the beginning, the evidence gap map, which will serve as a comprehensive tool for kind of navigating along these methods for assessing food systems research. It will help anyone from any discipline or to identify trends and gaps in areas that you are interested in for further synthesis and development. It will also help to kind of set a future agenda, both in terms of geographical and policy support. So I did a quick application of this to this session. So looking at Benin and fruit and vegetables, for example. So we find no studies that were done that assess fruit and vegetables or any specific commodity thereof from a food system perspective. But we do find studies that have applied methods such as indicators and metrics, framework development, and case examples, which could then potentially be interesting for applying that to your ongoing work. And this is where I'll pause my presentation. Over to you, Jodie.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rose. I think that paper is going to be a really important resource for people in this room and at this conference for looking at what methods have been used already in looking at these complex food systems, and also looking at gaps where we might choose to innovate new methods that would help us to look at those things. So I'm going to leave it there for now, but thank you everyone for being in the room today, and thank you very much again to our panel in the room and online. Maybe one last big hand for them. Thank you.